In this video, we will talk about the actions of some drugs at synapses. So many drugs that you may know about, they act at synapses. So many drugs act on synapses, or certainly on transmission of action potentials. And we can separate these drugs into two groups. We've got agonists, and these will be drugs that stimulate the nervous system, so make action potentials more likely. And we've also got drugs that are antagonists. And these are drugs that inhibit the nervous system, so make action potentials less likely. And there are a variety of different drugs that can affect synapses. I'm just going to mention a few as in this short video. There are various different ways in which drugs can affect synapses. And again, we're not covering all this information. This is definitely just an introduction to it, just to highlight some of the particularly interesting areas about this. So to switch on a synapse, so to make a synapse work, you've got some things that will pretend to be a neurotransmitter, mimic a neurotransmitter. Example here will be like nicotine in cigarettes. That mimics a neurotransmitter. Some will stimulate the release of a neurotransmitter. So things like caffeine in tea and coffee, amphetamines. They have an effect on the nervous system. They stimulate the nervous system by stimulating the release of a neurotransmitter. Some of these drugs can switch off a synapse, so they can block a neuroreceptor channel. So examples here are curare, which we'll come on to talk about just a little bit. Opiates like morphine, they work by blocking the neuroreceptor, so the neurotransmitter can't work. We have some drugs that just will stop action potentials in general, so they can stop the resting potential sodium-potassium pump, or they can block the channels needed for depolarization and repolarization as well. Another way to switch on a synapse and keep it working, you stop the enzyme that normally breaks down the neurotransmitter. Nerve gas, sarin, for example, organophosphate insecticides, they work by stopping the breakdown enzyme, by stopping acetylcholine esterase, so you can't break down acetylcholine. And we're just going to look at a few of these examples in a little bit more detail. So if we start with nicotine, so nicotine is in cigarettes, similar shape to acetylcholine, and it will cause a similar effect to acetylcholine. And what it does, it has an excitatory effect on the postsynaptic membrane. It combines to the neuroreceptor, pretends to be acetylcholine, and you will fire action potentials. You'll get to depolarization in the postsynaptic neuron even when acetylcholine isn't there. And it means you need less acetylcholine, the real stuff, to actually generate an action potential in the postsynaptic neuron. So it's got a mild excitatory effect. You get after you first smoke a cigarette, you get a really high concentration of nicotine, and it takes about 45 minutes for this amount of nicotine to be reduced by half. So it's kind of a long-lasting effect, really, from one cigarette, smoking one cigarette. So it causes, an excitatory effect. It lasts longer than acetylcholine because there's nothing to remove the nicotine. So you maintain the stimulation. And eventually nicotine will be taken away and broken down in the liver. But you do get this overstimulation when you shouldn't have a response. And it affects all different organs in the body. The heart disease and the blood vessel damage caused by smoking, a lot of it's to do with this overstimulatory effect of the nicotine, because it means that the blood vessels constrict when they shouldn't. the heart beats faster, there's an increase in blood pressure, and over a long time this kind of damages the blood vessels in the heart, and you'll also get nerve damage as well. So not a good thing, not a good stimulatory effect to the nervous system. Opiates such as morphine and codeine also work at the synapses, and they are addictive because of their effects in the nervous system and very tightly controlled in the UK. It's not easy to even buy codeine. You have to talk to a pharmacist to get codeine, and they will very much limit the amount of codeine they will sell you because of its addictive effects. And what the opiates do is they are going to stop the transmission of information from the sensory neurons across into the central nervous system. So you might still be feeling the pain along your sensory neurons, but that message is not getting into the central nervous system. And they do this by blocking the neuroreceptors on the postsynaptic membrane. So even though the neurotransmitter is released, it can't bind and actually generate an action potential. So yeah, block these pathways into the spinal cord and the brain. Very effective painkillers, but very, very tightly controlled because of this. Curare is a really interesting drug, I think so anyway, a really interesting effect on the nervous system. So curare can be isolated from plants and can be is used by indigenous groups in the Amazon to capture their food. So these indigenous Native Americans here, they have got these blowpipes, they've got darts that they're covered in the curare, which they get from, they isolate it from certain plants in the Amazon. And what it does is it actually blocks acetylcholine transmission. So it causes paralysis. So these indigenous groups will use it to capture like wild game, for example, for food purposes. And it's really good at doing this because it causes paralysis in cholinergic synapses. So it stops the transmission, and the food that they're trying to capture becomes paralyzed. Now, it's purified forms of this are now used in medicine, and it's really good to be used as a muscle relaxant during surgery. So surgery on, for example, the abdomen or the chest, you don't want those muscles to be tense, contracted, so you can paralyze these muscles to make it easier to perform the surgery. And it's a reversible muscle relaxant, so it'll only work temporarily. So we use a highly purified form of this. When it's used in surgery, it's used along with an opiate to provide pain relief as well. And anaesthetists have to be really careful because not everybody responds to pain medication in the same way. So some opiates don't work on some people because of their genetic makeup. And you can have, if you Google kind of awake during surgery, you'll find all these horror stories of people who have gone to have surgery. Some of them have even had like open heart surgery. They have been given the muscle relaxant first, the purified curare, and then the opiate to put them to sleep. And the opiate hasn't actually worked on them, but because they're paralyzed, they're not capable of telling the surgeon that they're awake and can feel everything. It's a real thing. It's very rare, so don't worry about surgery with you. Definitely have a look at some of the stories on it. I'll try and put some up on Canvas as well for you. Doctors kind of haven't believed this, but then the people who it's happened to can actually recall like conversations that have occurred during their heart surgery. So it's a real thing, very rare. So this is why anaesthetists need to make sure the opiates work before paralyzing you during surgery. That's cheerful, isn't it? Another drug that's interesting to mention are things like organophosphate insecticides. So these are actually used to kill insects, pests in farming, and they work by inhibiting the enzyme acetylcholine esterase. And remember, this is the enzyme that destroys the acetylcholine so that you stop transmission of information across the synapse. And if you don't destroy this, it means you are continuously generating action potentials, and the action potentials are not controlled, and you end up with an uncoordinated kind of response, uncontrollable muscle contraction and death in insects, because all the muscles are contracting and keep contracting, the diaphragm or the muscles wherever in whichever part of the insect, will lead to death. It'll even happen in humans if they take or they're exposed to high enough levels of organophosphate insecticide. So it's really, really tightly controlled to stop this. The very last drug to mention is the drug I can't say, tetrodotoxin. I've never been able to say it, but this is found in pufferfish, in some octopuses, and it blocks sodium channels. So it blocks the sodium channels, and it means that neurons and muscle, when they need this sodium entry in order to send a message for muscle contraction, send a message from the nervous system, it means this message can't be sent. So again, body is paralyzed. Paralyze the diaphragm, for example, so you can't breathe if your diaphragm can't contract to help you breathe. Kind of the worst thing about this is that cardiac muscle is quite resistant to this, so it's not really affected. So when you're exposed to high amounts of this, it takes you a couple of minutes to die because you struggle to breathe, but your heart continues to beat. It seems like a very negative way to end this. This video, the last video you'll watch, but yeah, a lot of drugs that we talk about are acting on synapses, and you'll learn lots more about them in your future studies. Thank you.